Joining us now from Kabul is Haroun Mir, a leading political analyst. And here in Washington in the studio, the former US ambassador to Afghanistan, Ronald Neumann. Thank you both for joining us. Let's start with you, Haroun, in Kabul. You know, we just heard from our correspondent, Sean Caleb's, who was in Afghanistan in the first round of voting. He talked about the enthusiasm of the Afghan people. Now with this political standoff, has that enthusiasm dissipated? Is that no longer there?
Certainly people are worried, and the Afghan people overwhelmingly came out despite challenges and threat to their own life, and they voted in the first round as well as in the second round. But unfortunately, we did not expect this high level of fraud that happened in the second round, and certainly that has tainted the entire election process, and it's undermined the legitimacy of the two institutions, the Independent Election Commission and the Complaint Commission. And so there was a problem, and fortunately now we are in the process of solving this issue. The two camps and the two candidates have agreed for an audit, an entire audit of the entire vote, which will take some time, and hopefully by the end of the process we will have a clear winner. Meanwhile, they have also agreed that regardless of the outcome of the election, they will work together and they will try to form a unity government.
Yeah, let's hope that happens. But first of all, let's get back to the current crisis. Ambassador Neumann, you know, and you, Haroun, we could have seen this coming. I mean, in 2009, we had huge amounts of allegations of fraud. Did the international community and the US and the Afghans really just hope for the best here? It seems a little bit like a replay.
Well, a little bit. I think not entirely. The makeup of the Electoral Commission and the Complaints Commission is now quite different. The internationals are excluded. I think one of the things that happened after the 2009 election was that the international community felt like it had gotten too deeply involved, once bitten, twice shy, and didn't want to involve itself. I think it was a little too laid back. In the first round, there was probably some fraud, but it didn't really matter because it didn't change anybody's perception of who the two winners were. In the second round, it became much worse. There were a lot of warnings, and there were warnings from the first round that the Electoral Commission was not sufficiently transparent. But you know, this is a new process in Afghanistan. This is really the first really contested election because there wasn't too much doubt that President Karzai was capable of winning in 2009. But this time was contested. This is new.
Now, we haven't talked about the ethnic dimension in this election. Abdullah, Tajik Pashtun, but largely seen Tajik, the other candidate, Pashtun. Is it possible that Pashtuns came out in large numbers in the second round because they didn't see the violence that was thought to happen, going to happen with the Taliban in the first round, or is it out-and-out fraud? Haroun?
Indeed, Dr. Ashraf Ghani was able to mobilize its own political base, which is mainly in the south, in the east, in the second round. But meanwhile, Dr. Abdullah also received some important endorsement from major and important Pashtun leaders in the south, particularly in the Kandahar. For instance, Zalmay Rasool, who was running in the first round, he endorsed Abdullah and he received a majority of the vote in the first round. So I believe the second round was not a race just concentrated on ethnic issue or ethnic differences. I think both candidates got important endorsement from all ethnic groups, and the issue was simply the fraud, which was unimaginable before, and we were not ready to confront this kind of widespread fraud in the second round.
These two candidates, Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah, you know them well, Ambassador, you do too. Haroun, what do they stand for? Because we're so used to Hamid Karzai. What are their policies, and what are the Afghani people being asked to choose?
Well, they're both very decent men. They each could be a perfectly acceptable president of Afghanistan, and from the American point of view, I think they are both friends of the West. Ashraf Ghani, of course, is a technocrat with a high level of economic background, who's been making a rapid study and learning Afghan politics. Abdullah was foreign minister, has been in government. there is, Ashraf Ghani has been more specific about his economic ideas, but in broad terms, I think it is too early to say that there is a clear ideological difference.
Haroun, do you see big differences between the two candidates?
No, there is no ideological differences. Even their programs are quite similar to each other. Both have campaigned for reform, and both have campaigned to fight corruption, and also both have campaigned to sign the bilateral security agreement with the United States. So there are no major differences, and so why it's so easy for both candidates to reach a political agreement on a national unity government.
Let's get to the current election crisis and the standoff. Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry put forward a deal after the allegations of vote rigging to recount the votes. Let's hear his statement, and I want to get your reaction to that afterwards.
The United States has one overriding interest here, and that is the people of Afghanistan. That Afghanistan have a government that is recognized by all of the people through a legitimate democratic process. And we want a unified, stable, democratic Afghanistan.
That's the question, isn't it, Ambassador? Stable, democratic Afghanistan, what will it take?
It'll take time. I mean, Afghanistan has made real progress. 7 million people in the first round and something close to that in the second who defied violence to come out and vote. This election's important. And when you think about it, Afghanistan is one of only 2 countries to have even this level of democracy from, I would say, the northern border of India to the western border of Russia. This is a large peace territory. Secondly, I think what John Kerry's effort shows is that you need continued involvement of American diplomacy, but you also need the military and the aid. That simply threatening, as we did at first, if you guys don't work this out, we'll leave. That didn't work. It took a diplomatic effort, but the diplomatic effort had weight and influence because of the aid. These things are connected.
Haroun Mir, you're nodding. Do you agree? But first of all, let me just add, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars poured into Afghanistan by the US and the international community, and still democracy on a knife edge here.
Well, I'm someone who has lived in Afghanistan through the years of conflict. I was in Kabul during the 1990s, and during the Taliban, I was with Commander Massoud in the northern part of the country. So it's we could not imagine how fast we have improved. Particularly, we moved from a dark era of the Taliban where there was no rights for anyone, and then suddenly to a democracy. I've been criticizing the Afghan government for the past 6-7 years, and I've received no threat from the government. So this is a big achievement, not only in democracy, but also in human rights, women's rights, and also education for young Afghans, the healthcare, all the progresses that we have achieved in the past 13 years is considerable for us. And I believe what we Afghans need, as John Kerry mentioned as well, is stability and continuity in Afghanistan, and the international community promised another decade of assistance, which we call it the decade of transformation from 2014 to 2024. This is very, very important for us. And so why we need also the support and assistance of the international community, and particularly the mediation of the U.S. government, particularly the trip by John Kerry in Afghanistan, is much appreciated by Afghans, because we still need the support of the international community in order to strengthen our institutions and make all these achievements irreversible.
So if I could just make one point. I think people often try to pick and say, well, it's all bad or it's all good. There is way, way too much accomplished to say this is a failure. And there is way too much left to do to say that success is assured. And people don't want to live in that middle ground, but that's where we are.
Can I just pick up on your point, because we are in that middle ground right now. We have the Independent Electoral Commission recounting 23,000 ballot boxes. The UN meant to supervise. Just before we came on air, I got an email from the UN about parameters of that process. This process is very muddy. There's sovereignty issues. There's accountability issues. Do you think we're going to have a clear process? And then at the end of it, remember, the second part of this plan is that there will be a power-sharing government between the two candidates. One will be president and one eventually, potentially, a prime minister.
Will be something, yes. We're not sure what.
Exactly. So, we have the ballot counting, and then...
I think that the ballot counting process will be messy, but at the end of the day, it will give a sufficiently clear result, and it will be accepted. It will probably not be accepted without protest, because this is also part of honor in the Afghan culture. Losing is dishonorable, so I expect some protest, but I expect it will be accepted.
On that positive note, let's take a break. And when we return, what will be the future of Afghanistan after US troops pull out in 2016? That's next. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.